now is the knowing. That simple yet really profound idea is right at the heart of what we're exploring today. These are the deeply practical Buddhist teachings of Ajahn Sumedho. And you, our listener, actually brought this amazing book, Now is the Knowing, to our attention. Maybe you were looking for some clarity on, core Buddhist principles.
Yeah.
And how they genuinely apply to your life right now.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So our goal in this deep dive is really to unpack these ideas. They can sometimes feel a bit abstract, maybe.
They definitely can.
And we want to pull out the truly useful insights, those sort of aha moments that just click without leaving you feeling totally overwhelmed.
Exactly. And Now is the Knowing it's generously shared by Aruna Publications under a Creative Commons license, which is great.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
It's basically a reflection of Ajahn Sumedho's many, many years as a Buddhist monk. It's his wisdom kind of distilled down and offered freely for learning. And the book, it touches on some really fundamental areas. The Buddha, Dhamma, and Saṅgha, the cornerstones of Buddhist practice.
The three jewels, yeah.
Then Ānāpānasati, which is mindfulness of breathing, the big one. And finally, it explores happiness, unhappiness, and that ultimate peace, Nibbāna. So yeah, we have some pretty rich territory to explore together.
Absolutely. So our mission today is to really get to the essence of Ajahn Sumedho's teachings on these key topics, taking refuge, the power of being mindful, and the Buddhist understanding of happiness.
Yeah.
And hopefully provide you with a clearer, more grounded, and maybe more applicable understanding of these fundamental concepts.
Yeah.
Let's dive right in with what's often seen as the foundation, taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Saṅgha.
Okay. Well, this practice is traditionally expressed through a Pali chant, Buddham saranam gacchami, Dhammam saranam gacchami, and Saṅgha saranam gacchami.
Right.
And that translates roughly to, I go to the Buddha for refuge, I go to the Dhamma for refuge, and I go to the Saṅgha for refuge. But Ajahn Sumedho makes a really critical point here. Simply reciting these words, well, it isn't enough. They're meant to be invitations for reflection, really, for a genuine investigation into what each of these terms actually means.
Okay, let's unpack this then. What exactly does it mean to take refuge? And who or what is this Buddha we're taking refuge in?
Right. So refuge in this context, it's like finding a safe harbor, a reliable source of protection, of guidance. And Buddha, as Ajahn Sumedho points out, quite literally means the one who knows, the awakened one. Now, initially, your mind might jump to Siddhartha Gautama, the historical Buddha.
Yeah, the guy from India, way back when.
Yeah.
Taught the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path.
Exactly. He's definitely a central figure, no question. However, taking refuge in the Buddha, it actually goes beyond just acknowledging this historical person.
Okay.
It's about recognizing and connecting with the inherent wisdom that's present in the universe, and importantly, within our own minds, too.
Within us.
Yes. Ajahn Sumedho describes it as something not separate from us, but actually more fundamentally real than, say, our passing thoughts or what we experience through our senses. He even suggests that without this underlying wisdom, the world as we perceive it wouldn't even be possible.
Wow, that's a really different way to think about it.
Yeah.
So it's less about worshiping a deity and more about aligning ourselves with this inherent intelligence.
Precisely. And while the Buddhist tradition uses the term Buddha wisdom, Ajahn Sumedho is very clear that these are just labels, signposts.
Right.
Other spiritual traditions might use totally different words to point towards the same essential principle. The important thing is using the symbol, Buddha, to remind ourselves to cultivate wisdom, to be alert, to be awake in our own lives.
He even brings up that practice of the Thai forest monks meditating on Buddha, the one who knows. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, that's fascinating. They use Buddha almost like a koan, a puzzle for the mind. So they'll first calm their minds, often by focusing on the breath while silently repeating Buddha. Then they start to deeply contemplate, what exactly is this Buddha? What is this knowing it refers to?
So they investigate the word itself.
Exactly. Ajahn Sumedho shares his experiences with Ajahn Chah, whose teachings often circled around this very point. The aim wasn't just mechanical repetition, but a real investigation, exploring the very beginning and end of this experience of knowing. Eventually, the mind can become completely absorbed in it, leading to this profound silence that's beyond just the sound of the word. It's a very direct way to explore the nature of awareness itself.
So it's like a technique to tap into that inherent wisdom by directly examining what it feels like to know something.
You got it.
Yeah.
And Ajahn Sumedho contrasts this true refuge in wisdom with, well, what he calls taking refuge in things that can't truly protect us. Material stuff like Lucky Charms or even institutions like banks.
Right, things we often rely on for security.
Yeah, but they only offer a temporary sense of security, he points out. Ultimately, they're unreliable. Real, lasting safety comes from living and acting with wisdom, grounded in that internal Buddha wisdom.
He makes a really clear distinction between saying, I am Buddha, and I take refuge in Buddha. That seems like a key difference.
Oh, it's absolutely crucial. It's about humbly acknowledging and orienting ourselves towards that wisdom, cultivating our own awareness, rather than making some grand claim about being enlightened ourselves.
Right.
The Pali phrase, Buddham Saranam Gacchami, it serves as a constant reminder against our kind of ingrained habit of seeking comfort and security in negative states, worry, doubt, fear, all that.
Yeah, we do that a lot.
We do. And the image of the Buddha, he notes, acts as a symbol of this calm alertness, a direct contrast to our own minds, which are so often clouded by, deluded thoughts and knee-jerk reactions.
Okay, so that's the Buddha refuge. Now let's move on to the second one, the Dhamma. He describes it as ultimate truth or ultimate reality, and importantly, emphasizes that it's impersonal. Why impersonal? That might sound a bit cold to some people.
That's a really good question. The Dhamma is impersonal in the sense that it exists independently of our personal opinions or beliefs. It's beyond our usual way of labeling things good or bad based on our own preferences.
Okay.
Ajahn Sumedho breaks down its Pali description, starting with Sandi.ti haiko, which means imminent, here and now. The core insight here is that truth isn't some distant concept, but something directly accessible in your experience right now.
Not something out there, but right here.
Exactly. It's not something you have to go searching for in some far-off place or time.
Got it. So it's about what's happening right in front of us, basically.
Precisely. Then there's akaliko, timeless, not bound by time conditions. Now, this is a concept that our logical, time-bound minds can really struggle with.
Yeah.
Because all our perceptions are naturally rooted in the flow of time, right? But it points to a deeper reality that isn't limited by our temporal understanding.
Timeless. Definitely a mind bender, but intriguing. What's the next characteristic?
Ihipasiko, which means come and see. This really emphasizes that the Dhamma isn't something you just passively accept on faith.
Right.
It requires your active effort, your own awareness, a willingness to turn towards truth and investigate for yourself. It's like that saying, knock and it shall be opened. You have to actively engage.
So it's not about just believing what someone tells you, but actively exploring it for yourself, like a scientist of your own experience.
Precisely. Then Opanayuko means leading inwards, towards inner peace, towards Nibbāna. The Dhamma doesn't lead to external excitement or, fleeting pleasures, but to a deep and lasting sense of calm and inner silence.
Leading inwards. Okay. And the final one.
Pakatam, veditabo vinyuhi, known through direct experience. This is maybe the most crucial aspect.
Okay.
Just like the unique taste of honey can only be truly known by tasting it yourself, the Dhamma can only be understood through your own immediate personal experience, not through intellectual gymnastics or secondhand reports. It's very experiential.
So taking refuge in the Dhamma isn't about signing up for a specific philosophy or belief system, but more about recognizing and actually being that inherent truth in the present moment in your own direct experience.
Exactly right. And Ajahn Sumedho addresses that potential concern about the impersonality of the Dhamma, especially for people coming from traditions emphasizing a personal God.
Right.
He explains that we typically only feel the need for a personal relationship with something we perceive as separate from ourselves. But the Dhamma isn't separate. It's something we inherently are. It's the very nature of reality.
I see.
So taking refuge in it is a kind of maturing process where we stop constantly needing external protection or external love because we realize we have the capacity to find that within ourselves and, importantly, offer it to others too.
That's a really profound shift from how we usually think about seeking refuge or security. Okay, let's move to the third refuge, the Saṅgha, the community.
Right. Saṅgha refers to a group. Specifically, it can mean both the Bhikkhu Saṅgha, which is the formal order of monks and nuns, and also the Arya Saṅgha, which is the community of noble beings, basically. Anyone, monastic or lay, who lives virtuously.
Anyone living virtuously.
Yes. So taking refuge in the Saṅgha, as Ajahn Sumedho explains it, means taking refuge in virtue itself, in goodness, kindness, compassion, generosity, specifically in our actions and our speech. It's about the intention behind our behavior.
So it's about consciously choosing Wholesome actions, beneficial actions,
Yeah.
rather than just giving in to negative impulses like anger or greed.
Precisely. We all experience a whole mix of thoughts and intentions, right? Good, bad, neutral. Taking refuge in the Saṅgha means actively aligning ourselves with the intention to do good, to cultivate compassion and loving kindness towards ourselves and all other beings.
He calls it a very practical refuge for daily life. How so?
Absolutely. It means making a conscious effort day to day to refrain from actions that cause division, disharmony, or cruelty to any living being, including ourselves. This is what it means to be supat.ipano, one who practices well, who lives by virtuous principles.
Mhm.
And Ajahn Sumedho really emphasizes that acting on cruel or selfish impulses inevitably leads to harm and suffering, not just potentially for others, but for our own inner peace as well. He uses the example of people who engage in harmful acts and the inner turmoil they often carry, even if they escape external punishment.
Yeah, he even shares a personal reflection about experiencing unpleasant results from his own past negative actions. That makes it feel less theoretical, more like direct cause and effect we can all relate to.
It really does, and it naturally leads into the idea that cultivating a meditative practice helps us realize our complete responsibility for our own lives. We start moving beyond that tendency to blame others or external situations for our unhappiness.
Yeah, that blame habit is strong.
It is. He recounts his own past tendency to blame and how he eventually saw how, well, ultimately futile that approach really is.
And then he brings in that incredibly powerful example of Jesus on the cross saying, "Forgive them, Lord, they know not what they do."
Yes, that's presented as just a profound illustration of wisdom in action, choosing not to blame even in the face of immense suffering. Ajahn Sumedho suggests the root of the problem isn't always the actions of others, but lies within us in our own aversions, our own selfishness.
So the suffering comes more from our reaction.
Often, yes. Not necessarily the external event itself, but our internal reaction to it, our resistance, our aversion.
Okay, so summing up this first part, taking refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, and Saṅgha isn't about blind faith or just chanting words. It's a very conscious, active choice to use these as guiding principles for our present moment awareness and our journey towards awakening, leading us towards wisdom, towards virtue, right here in our everyday lives.
Exactly. It's about being fully present right here, right now, with intention and awareness guiding how we live.
All right, let's shift gears now to the second core topic in Ajahn Sumedho's book, Ānāpānasati, the mindfulness of breathing. He starts by highlighting something quite simple. How often we completely overlook this incredibly ordinary act that literally sustains our lives.
It's so true, isn't it? We usually only notice our breath when something's wrong, like when we're out of breath or sick.
Yeah.
But in Ānāpānasati, we intentionally bring our attention to our normal everyday breath, just as it is. That becomes the focus of meditation. And importantly, without trying to control it or change its natural rhythm, just observing.
He really emphasizes how constantly present and accessible our breath is.
Yeah.
Always there.
Absolutely. It's with us every single moment, a natural process that just keeps going, whether we pay attention or not. And the beauty is, as he points out, you don't need any special qualifications or equipment or even like a high IQ to observe your own breathing.
Right. Anyone can do it.
Anyone. And Ajahn Sumedho underscores a really important point here. Profound wisdom often arises not from chasing grand, complex theories, but from deeply observing the simple, ordinary parts of our experience, like the breath.
But he also acknowledges that just focusing on the breath can sometimes feel, well, pretty unexciting.
Yeah.
And that can lead to restlessness in the mind.
Yes, definitely, because our minds are so conditioned to seek out more stimulating things, right? Compared to, say, captivating music or a gripping story. The gentle, repetitive rhythm of the breath can feel quite neutral, maybe even a bit boring sometimes. And even though we might intellectually want peace and quiet, the actual experience of that tranquility can feel unfamiliar, maybe even a little frustrating, because we're just so used to constant mental chatter and stimulation.
So what exactly is the practice of Ānāpānasati then? How do you do it?
It involves simply, gently noticing the beginning, the middle, and the end of each inhalation, and the beginning, middle, and end of each exhalation. And doing that with a sense of open curiosity, a kind of neutrality, without any judgment or expectation about what should be happening. Ajahn Sumedho really stresses that the aim isn't to achieve some special state, like deep concentration or, samadhi or jhana right away.
Right.
It's more about cultivating a sense of humble contentment with each single breath, just as it arises and passes, allowing the mind to naturally settle and slow down through that simple attention.
Okay. And what about when our minds inevitably start to wander off? Because, let's be honest, they do, a lot.
Oh, absolutely. That's a universal experience, and it's actually a key part of the practice. The mind will wander, that's just its nature, like a puppy exploring.
Okay.
The core of the practice lies in gently and patiently redirecting our attention back to the breath each time we notice it has strayed. And crucially, without any frustration or self-criticism.
Gently. That seems important.
Very important. Ajahn Sumedho uses a wonderful analogy. It's like a wild horse being gradually trained and harnessed. The mind, like that horse, will initially resist being tethered to one single point of focus, like the breath.
So it's about a gentle and persistent return, not like a forceful battle with our thoughts.
Precisely. Trying to forcefully suppress or silence the mind usually backfires. It's counterproductive and ultimately unsustainable.
Right.
Ajahn Sumedho suggests that if you notice your mind wandering off during, say, the inhalation, you can just put a little more gentle effort into really feeling that inhalation. Same for the exhalation.
Okay.
And he strongly encourages cultivating what's often called a beginner's mind with each new breath, letting go of whatever distraction just happened and starting fresh. The very act of gently bringing the mind back, he says, is itself a moment of mindfulness.
Like the patient parent guiding the child you mentioned earlier.
Exactly like that. The wandering isn't a failure. It's actually an opportunity to practice gentle awareness and patience.
He also talks about the importance of cultivating a more relaxed, even joyful approach to the practice. That might seem counterintuitive, especially if you're struggling.
Yes, he cautions against approaching meditation with, like, excessive seriousness or rigidity or a feeling of repression. He actually encourages us to gladden the mind, to bring a sense of ease, maybe even a little bit of humor to it.
Humor in meditation.
Why not? Take the pressure off. Don't feel you have to achieve some profound state immediately. He even playfully suggests that simply experiencing one mindful inhalation can be seen as a significant achievement in itself.
Okay, I like that. My mind seems to specialize in distractions, so the idea of one mindful breath being a win really resonates. That definitely takes some pressure off.
It absolutely does. He reassures us that meditation isn't some grim battle against inner demons. It's an opportunity to cultivate peace and clarity, and it can actually become quite pleasurable over time. He advises us to recognize resistance, those feelings of agitation or boredom, as simply fear or frustration arising, and then consciously choose to relax into the experience rather than fighting it.
Relax to the boredom.
Yeah, just allow it to be there, observe it. He even shares his own early experiences of being overly grim and serious in his practice, and how he learned to actively contemplate peace as an antidote to doubts and restlessness.
Patience really seems to be a core ingredient here, a recurring theme.
Absolutely essential. He beautifully compares the initial awkwardness we might feel in meditation to learning any new skill, like, say, playing the guitar.
Right, you don't expect to play complex chords on day one.
Exactly. You need time, you need practice. He emphasizes learning to simply witness our mental states, restlessness, dullness, whatever comes up without judging them, just acknowledging what is present in that moment. He encourages sustaining focus for even just half an inhalation if that's all you can manage right now. Avoid that self-imposed pressure of instant perfection. And he makes a really crucial distinction. Recognizing that your mind is scattered is wisdom. Getting angry about it is just more ignorance.
It's a helpful reframe. He also uses the analogy of learning yoga, right?
Yeah.
Starting with basic stretching.
Exactly. You start where you are with your current capacity and gradually build from there. Don't try the advanced postures on day one. He suggests setting realistic, achievable goals for your meditation sessions and just experimenting to find the right balance between effort and relaxation that works for you.
And he emphasizes that learning from what we might perceive as mistakes is actually a fundamental part of the whole process.
Absolutely fundamental. He compares it to babies learning to walk. They fall down constantly, right? But they get back up and eventually they learn. We cultivate wisdom in a similar way. By observing our own moments of ignorance, by making what feel like mistakes in our practice, and by simply continuing to show up, to keep practicing. He cautions against overthinking the whole thing, which can easily make meditation seem impossible.
Yeah, paralysis by analysis.
Right. And he reminds us that enthusiasm and inspiration, they come and go. They're impermanent, like everything else. So we need to cultivate consistent effort even during those times when we feel bored or uninspired. Because it's through that steady effort that we begin to break free from habitual mental loops and experience deeper states of cessation and inner silence.
He also briefly touches on the importance of physical posture during meditation, not just sitting slouched over.
Yes, he addresses that common idea that meditation should be completely effortless. He notes that too much passivity can actually lead to dullness and sleepiness rather than focused awareness.
Right, nodding off.
Exactly. He highlights how maintaining an upright, alert physical posture can actually support our mental effort and help us stay present and awake. He even mentions his own early explorations with practices like headstands and shoulder stands as ways to cultivate energy and effort.
Wow, okay. Now, he also talks about mindfulness of thought within the context of breath meditation, which might seem a bit contradictory at first glance. Aren't we supposed to be focusing on the breath?
Yes, but he explains that our mind's natural tendency is often to follow the path of least resistance, which usually leads to a kind of cluttered, confused mental state. And thinking, well, it's a deeply ingrained habit for almost everyone.
For sure.
So to move beyond being constantly swept away by our thoughts, we actually need to cultivate mindfulness of those thoughts. This means putting forth the effort to simply watch and listen to the flow of mental activity without judging, without getting hooked by the content.
Just watching them float by.
Kind of like that, yeah. When we simply recognize thoughts as impermanent mental events, just movements within the mind, they naturally begin to slow down and eventually cease. Not through force or annihilation, but through this compassionate allowing them to pass. And that creates more mental space, more clarity.
Okay. And he connects this whole process to the foundational Buddhist concepts of samatha and vipassana. Can you break those down for us a bit?
Sure. He explains that consistently focusing on the breath has a calming effect on what are called the kamic formations, basically, the mental patterns, the habits of thought and action that create noise and agitation.
Okay.
This calming leads to samatha, which translates as tranquility or mental stillness. The mind becomes more settled, more malleable. He then describes carrying this tranquility to a point called upakkara samadhi, or approaching concentration.
Approaching concentration.
Yeah, it's a state where the mind is calm and settled, but still aware of its surroundings, not completely absorbed like in the deeper states of jhana. This foundation of tranquility, this samatha, then supports vipassana.
Which is insight.
Exactly. Vipassana is insight, or clear seeing, using our wisdom faculty to investigate the true nature of our experience. We start to observe the impermanence, anicca, the inherent unsatisfactoriness, dukkha, and the non-self nature, anatta, of all that arises, starting right there with the breath itself. And these aren't just beliefs to adopt, they are observable realities in our experience.
So observing our breath, something that just happens naturally, without our conscious control, helps us directly experience that concept of not self, anatta. How does that work?
Precisely. Breathing is a natural physiological process. It happens without us having to consciously will each inhale and exhale, right?
Right.
In that sense, it doesn't belong to us in some fixed, personal, controllable way. Recognizing this impersonal nature, even in something as intimate as our breath, is a direct experience of vipassana, seeing the not-self characteristic of conditioned phenomena.
He also touches on the sense of humility that can arise from this kind of deep, focused meditation, not getting a big head about it.
Yes, Ajahn Sumedho playfully calls the wisdom gained here earthworm knowledge. It's grounded, it's real, but it's also inherently humbling. It doesn't inflate the ego or lead to feelings of, grand spiritual attainment.
Right.
And he also acknowledges that from a conventional worldly perspective, just sitting and focusing on your breath might seem, unimportant, maybe even selfish, especially when there are so many huge global issues demanding attention. Someone listening might think, shouldn't I be out there solving problems instead of just watching my breath?
Yeah, that's a fair question. And how does he address that? He asks, what is the real world?
Right. He challenges our usual idea of the real world as being mainly about external events and our beliefs about them. He asserts that meditation, by focusing on direct, unmediated experience, is actually a much more profound confrontation with the real world, as it truly is this constant, unceasing process of arising and passing away.
More real than our ideas about it.
Exactly. Rather than engaging with it through our theories or mental manipulations. He suggests that by deeply observing something as simple and fundamental as the breath, we can come to understand the very nature of all conditioned phenomena.
Finally, he beautifully connects this practice of Ānāpānasati to the core Buddhist concepts of samsara and Nibbāna. Can you elaborate on how breath meditation relates to those big ideas?
Yeah, it's a lovely connection. He defines samsara as this continuous cyclical pattern of arising and passing, of birth and death. And he illustrates it perfectly with the breath Each inhalation conditions the exhalation, and the exhalation conditions the next inhalation. It's a constant cycle.
Okay.
He uses the analogy of someone wanting only to inhale and never exhale to highlight the basic foolishness of clinging only to pleasant experiences, like inhaling satisfaction, and desperately trying to avoid the unpleasant, like exhaling difficulty.
Yeah, you can't just inhale forever.
You really can't. He explains that by mindfully observing this natural cycle of the breath, we begin to understand our attachment, our clinging to wanting things to be permanent, to be only pleasant. This direct observation of attachment then naturally leads to detachment, a letting go. Not an annihilation of feeling, but a liberation from clinging.
So seeing the cycle helps us let go of trying to control it.
Exactly. He emphasizes seeing a kind of perfection in the entire cycle of experience, including the parts we usually label as negative old age, sickness, death. This inward movement towards the unconditioned peace and silence of the mind, often called sunyutat, or emptiness, provides this crucial perspective. It allows us to engage with conditioned experiences without that blind reactivity. He reiterates that Buddhist meditation is fundamentally about this present moment awareness, being awake right now, understanding impermanence and not self, right in the middle of ordinary activities, sitting, standing, walking, lying down.
It's not somewhere else.
It's right here. He points out that the profound peace of the unconditioned is often overlooked precisely because we're so habitually drawn to the extraordinary, the novel, the stimulating.
We miss the quiet background.
We do. Ultimately, he concludes that the deep, direct realization of samsara, this very cycle of conditioned existence we're always in, is the very condition for Nibbāna.
Realizing the cycle is the way out.
In a sense, yes. It's an immediate, non-grasping recognition of how things truly are right now, encompassing both the conditioned and the unconditioned. The Buddha's teaching, he emphasizes, isn't about striving for some future state of becoming enlightened. It's about recognizing the enlightenment already inherent in our capacity for knowing right now. Now is the knowing.
That's a really powerful way to bring it all together. Okay, let's turn our attention now to the final section of now is the knowing. Happiness, unhappiness, and Nibbāna. Ajahn Sumedho states very clearly that Nibbāna is the ultimate goal of Buddhist meditation. See a profound peace that's actually realizable in this lifetime, not just something after death.
That's right.
So Nibbāna is the ultimate goal. In simple terms, maybe, what does that look like or feel like for someone just living their daily life?
That's a great way to ask it. Nibbāna essentially is liberation from suffering, freedom. Ajahn Sumedho starts this section by really examining the inherent limitations, the ultimately unsatisfactory nature of the sensual world.
The world of our senses.
Exactly. The world we experience through sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and also our thoughts, which he includes as a sense door. He points out how deeply dependent these sensory experiences are on various conditions changing all the time,
Right.
and yet how strongly we tend to get attached to them, to identify with them, whether it's the pleasure of a beautiful sunset, a great song, a delicious meal, a comforting touch, or even just getting lost in a fascinating train of thought.
Yeah, we really cling to those pleasant experiences. He emphasizes that this whole sensual world is fundamentally dukkha. Can you remind us what dukkha means again?
Dukkha is often translated as suffering, but it's broader than that. It means imperfect, impermanent, unsatisfactory, stressful, unreliable. He argues that we will never find perfect, lasting happiness or peace within the sensual world because its very nature is constant change and impermanence.
Okay.
If we expect it to provide ultimate lasting satisfaction, it will inevitably lead to disappointment and ultimately to dukkha, to suffering. Our suffering, he says, arises from this very expectation.
Expecting permanence from the impermanent.
Exactly. Expecting the sensual world to give us permanent security, unwavering happiness, perfect love, absolute safety. And also from our futile attempts to eliminate negative experiences, sickness, old age, death, loss.
He even uses that historical example, the persistent hope that science would eventually eradicate all illness and old age, to show how unrealistic this deep-seated expectation really is.
Yeah, it highlights the futility in trying to constantly control and manipulate external conditions just so we always get what we want and avoid what we don't want. Happiness in the sensual world, he notes, is always contingent on things lining up just right.
Right. It depends on things outside us.
Totally. And because those conditions inevitably shift, that happiness is inherently fleeting. It always gives way to unhappiness eventually. He even goes so far as to suggest that the very pursuit of happiness, as we normally think of it, as our ultimate goal, that pursuit itself is flawed.
Why flawed? Isn't happiness good?
It is, but happiness itself as we typically experience it through the senses is also dukkha. It's unsatisfactory in the long run because it's brief, it's dependent on things like good health or good fortune, which are themselves impermanent.
Ah, okay. So even happiness is unreliable. So if the ultimate aim isn't just to be happy in that usual sense, then what exactly is Nibbāna in relation to all this striving and dissatisfaction?
Right. Ajahn Sumedho clarifies that the Buddhist goal, Nibbāna, lies in moving away from this relentless, ultimately fruitless pursuit of constant sensual gratification. But importantly, not through a harsh rejection or denial of the sensual world itself.
Not becoming anti-pleasure.
No, it's through a deep, clear understanding of its limitations, its impermanent nature. In the state of Nibbāna, we no longer hold the expectation that the sensory world will ever fully and permanently satisfy us. Nor do we demand that our sensory experiences must be constantly pleasant. It's a fundamental shift in relationship.
He describes Nibbāna not as some kind of empty void, but as a specific kind of space within the mind. What does he mean by that? A mental space?
Yes, exactly. He describes it as a space that is free from attachment, free from delusion. A state of clarity where we can simply recognize the arising and passing of all sensory experiences, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, without clinging, without trying to hold on to the good ones or push away the bad ones.
That's letting them come and go.
Letting them come and go without demanding anything specific from them. It's not a state of blankness or annihilation, but rather a profound and liberating clarity of awareness.
This idea of no self, or anatta we talked about earlier, how does that connect here? It can sound a bit unsettling, the idea of no fixed self experiencing Nibbāna.
That's a really insightful question. Ajahn Sumedho addresses the inevitable suffering that comes simply with being born human.
Okay.
He explains that as long as we're born into this conditioned realm, we will experience old age, sickness, loss, and eventually death. That's just the karmic result of being born here.
It comes with the territory.
It does. He uses that poignant anecdote of the mother worried sick about her baby to illustrate this fundamental point. And he gently discourages unproductive speculation about past lives as the main explanation for current suffering.
Focus on the here and now.
Exactly. Focus on observing the way things are right now without falling into pessimism or despair. This understanding allows us to navigate difficulties with more wisdom and also to appreciate pleasant moments fully without being crippled by the fear of their passing. He emphasizes just how much unnecessary misery we create by constantly resisting reality, by clinging to unrealistic expectations that life should be different, including those romantic ideals that ignore the realities of separation and loss.
He draws a really powerful insight from observing young children and how openly they express sorrow when separated from a parent, for instance.
Yes, he highlights how natural the feeling of sorrow is. It's not something wrong or bad. He even shares his own experience from traveling, seeing constant arrivals and departures, and noticing that underlying sense of come back that often masks the deeper pain of separation.
Yeah.
He stresses how important it is to allow ourselves to fully witness these feelings of sorrow in our meditation practice, to really understand them without suppressing, denying, or distracting ourselves. He also mentions how some cultures tend to discourage expressing grief, which can lead to problems down the line.
Bottling it up.
Right. He explains that through mindful awareness and meditation, these suppressed emotions can gradually surface into consciousness and eventually cease naturally, rather than being continually pushed down.
He also talks about our very common habit of trying to avoid any kind of unpleasant experience, boredom, anger, fear.
Oh, yeah. He describes the million ways we habitually distract ourselves, TV, scrolling, eating, shopping, whatever, from feelings like boredom, anger, despair, any uncomfortable emotion.
Our avoidance strategies.
Exactly. Meditation, he explains, offers the opportunity to consciously allow ourselves to be fully present with these states when they arise. Not seeing them as personal failures, but observing them with compassion, allowing them to take their natural course towards cessation. He argues that by constantly avoiding these difficult experiences, we actually keep ourselves trapped in dreary mental habits and, interestingly, prevent ourselves from truly appreciating beauty and joy when they do arise.
That's counterintuitive. Facing the bad helps appreciate the good.
It seems so. He shares that intense early meditation experience he had, confronting deep hatred and fear, which was then followed by this profound, lasting experience of seeing everything as inherently beautiful.
Wow, that sounds like a major shift.
It really does. That anecdote powerfully illustrates the mind's clarity, its inherent beauty, when it's free from the obscurations of negative emotions and ingrained perceptions. He uses that simple but effective analogy of a dirty window. Our habitual negative perceptions are like grime obscuring reality. Meditation is like gently cleaning that window.
Okay. Now, he delves back into that core concept of non-self, anatta, in relation to happiness and suffering. For someone new to this, how does no self relate to our everyday feeling of I am happy or I am suffering?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? He explains that while being born inevitably brings old age, sickness, death, these are fundamentally characteristics of the body. And the body, according to Anatta, is not our permanent essential self.
It's just the physical vehicle.
In a way, yes, it's part of nature, following nature's laws of change. Now, he fully acknowledges that even if we understand this intellectually, there's often a very strong emotional attachment to this body in the sense of I connected to it.
Oh, definitely.
So he stresses the importance of just observing this attachment in meditation without judgment and without the unrealistic ideal of suddenly achieving complete non-attachment right away. He uses that practical analogy of climbing a tree.
Yeah.
You start at the base, where you actually are attached, not imagining yourself already at the top branch of non-attachment.
Start where you are. Makes sense.
He cautions that true wisdom involves understanding how nature operates, not just trying to purify the mind and then getting attached to the feeling of purity. Because even the most refined states of consciousness, he points out, are still ultimately unsatisfactory if you seek permanence, and they are dependent on conditions. Nibbāna, however, is unique. It's not dependent on any condition.
Independent.
Right. And he also reminds us that just rejecting the sensory world out of aversion or fear creates another blind habit. Patience and gentle observation are always key.
He encourages viewing our entire life as a continuous span of meditation, not just formal sits or retreats. How does that shift in perspective affect daily life?
It's incredibly liberating, potentially. Instead of seeing meditation as separate from real life, we bring that same quality of mindful awareness to everything we do, washing dishes, working, talking to people.
Okay.
He addresses that common experience of coming back from a retreat, feeling all peaceful, and then feeling unenlightened again when daily life hits, and the natural desire to cling to those refined retreat states.
Yeah, the post-retreat blues.
Exactly. But he wisely cautions that getting attached to refined experiences can actually make the bumps of daily life feel even more jarring. True insight wisdom, he explains, doesn't come from preferring refinement. It comes from recognizing both the refined and the coarse aspects of consciousness as equally impermanent, ultimately unsatisfactory if we seek lasting refuge there, and fundamentally not self.
Seeing it all with the same lens, he really emphasizes the profound simplicity of the Buddha's core teaching, like what is born must die. So simple, yet so hard to accept sometimes.
Absolutely. He points out this isn't some complex philosophy only for intellectuals. It's a fundamental truth accessible to everyone. He addresses the common youthful tendency to deny death, our strong attachment to youth, and the constant pursuit of happiness. He explains that reflecting on aging and death in meditation isn't about being morbid. It actually helps us live more mindfully, more carefully now, with a deeper understanding of the natural cycle. He also highlights how many harmful actions stem from a lack of this wise reflection, from focusing only on fleeting pleasures without considering consequences or impermanence.
He encourages us to really reflect on our own personal experiences, the highs and lows, delight and depression.
Yes, observe our natural tendency to cling to pleasant feelings, to moments of excitement or inspiration, but then he wisely cautions against relying solely on these fleeting states for our well-being. They're impermanent by nature.
Right. Inspiration fades.
It does. Clinging to it leads to disappointment when it goes. He uses the analogy of constantly seeking the initial spark of romance in one relationship after another. He highlights a crucial pattern. Attachment to hope leads to despair. Excitement leads to boredom. Romance can lead to disillusionment. Life inevitably leads to death. Suffering arises from attaching to conditions and expecting them to be more solid and lasting than they are.
So he concludes this section by explaining how true, lasting enjoyment in life actually comes from letting go of this very act of identification, of clinging.
Exactly. He points out how much of life we spend either anxiously waiting and hoping for something better, or worrying and fearing the loss of what we have. Attachment to hope, he repeats, is a direct path to despair.
We create our own misery.
In large part, yes. Through our ignorance and our persistent identification with things that are inherently unsatisfactory and impermanent, enlightenment, in its essence, he defines simply as stopping this process of mistaken identification, learning to let go.
And enlightened beings, they still live in the world.
Yes. He describes them not as people who've escaped the sensory world, but as individuals no longer attached to or deluded by it. This freedom allows them to coexist with it, appreciate its beauty, use it for compassionate action, for joyful giving, but without demanding ultimate satisfaction from it. Demanding that satisfaction from the sensory world, he reiterates, is a guaranteed path to despair.
So when we stop identifying with experiences as me or mine, seeing their in its own nature.
Then we become free to enjoy the senses without that underlying dependence and clinging. We become able to endure difficulties with more patience and peace, adapt to change without resistance. He suggests that a lack of this contemplation leads us to see the world as frightening, like a jungle. Nibbāna is getting away from this self-created jungle of fear and suffering.
He ends with a really powerful image, the inherently peaceful nature of the mind itself underneath all the turbulence.
Yes, he explains that inclining towards Nibbāna means moving towards this inherent peace of the mind, a peace that exists even when the surface conditions, thoughts, feelings are turbulent.
Like the calm depths beneath stormy waves.
That's a good way to put it. He makes that crucial distinction between the mind itself, like space, vast and unaffected, and the conditions of mind, feelings, thoughts, sensations that constantly come and go within that space without fundamentally changing the space itself.
Okay.
He uses the analogy of a room and its contents. If we fixate on the contents, the furniture, the mess, we react. But if we shift focus to the spaciousness of the room itself, we gain perspective, detachment.
Right.
He emphasizes that by learning to abide in this fundamental emptiness or spaciousness of the mind, we allow conditions to arise and pass without our habitual reactions, attachment, resistance, manipulation. This is the practice of letting go identification, driven by understanding impermanence and non-self, the heart of vipassana.
And that question, if I'm not the conditions, then what am I?
He addresses that by saying true self-knowledge isn't about finding some other fixed thing to be, it's about recognizing what we are not. The problem is our belief in, our identification with what we are not. That's what causes the suffering.
So the path is letting go of the mistaken identity.
Exactly. Letting go of blind attachment and identification with the appearances of the sensory world, learning from it, watching it, without being deluded by it. Penetrating it with brutal wisdom, becoming more at ease with wisdom itself.
Oh.
Through listening, observing, being awake, applying that to our body, thoughts, feelings, memories, emotions, allowing them all to arise and pass. And his final, maybe ultimate instruction is then offered. At this time, you have nothing else to do except be wise from one moment to the next.
Now is the knowing.
Yeah.
Wow, that really brings us full circle in our deep dive into Ajahn Sumedho's profound teachings. As you so clearly illuminated, the core message seems to be one of, well, deep yet accessible simplicity. True refuge, lasting peace, genuine wisdom. They aren't found out there or in the future. They're found in deeply understanding the nature of our present moment experience and in learning to let go of that attachment, that mistaken identification.
Exactly. And these ancient timeless principles, they hold immense relevance for you, our listener, as you navigate, the complexities and challenges of modern life. They really offer a clear, practical path through the noise, the overwhelm, the uncertainty, and that often frustrating chase for lasting happiness in a world that just keeps changing.
So as you move through your day-to-day, maybe just take a moment here and there to reflect on some of these insights. Taking refuge in wisdom and kindness, paying gentle attention to the simple act of breathing, or noticing the flow of your thoughts and feelings. Observing how happiness and suffering come and go without getting totally swept away.
Yeah, just noticing. And on that profound note, perhaps we can leave you with Ajahn Sumedho's powerful statement, the gift of Dhamma is greater than all other gifts. Maybe take some time to contemplate what that might mean for you in your own search for deeper understanding and lasting well-being. It really is an invitation, isn't it, to keep exploring these incredibly rich teachings.